So now we've worked on our tone. Then it's time to start working on our fingers, our technique. And every band director ever will tell you, go home and practice your scales, go home and practice your scales. But it's important to know how to practice our scales, because we can sit and we can play scales until we're blue in the face. But if we're not practicing scales effectively, if we're not practicing scales smartly, intelligently, our scale practice isn't going to do us any good. So I recommend working on one major scale and one minor scale every week, and setting a tempo goal, saying, okay, this week I can play my C major scale at quarter note equals 50 in quarter notes. And you get out your metronome. If you don't have a metronome, there are some fantastic metronome.
Trevor James metronome.
There is a Trevor James metronome app that you can get.
It's fantastic. There's fun sounds on it. It's great.
Yes. And you just get the app on your phone and use that at home, and you don't have to go and buy anything different. There are lots of great metronomes if you want to go and buy things, and I have one on my phone, and I have a hard physical metronome that I can bring with me places. And you get out your metronome and you set a tempo goal. So now you've set a tempo goal, but you still have to play the scale. So we have C major at, do you have the metronome app? Let's
me go grab that.
Let's see if we can do that. So you have C major at quarter note equals 50. And first of all, you go through and you figure out what's the key signature, what notes am I going to be playing, and then you kind of assess, okay, what are the challenges of this particular scale? We have certain notes that are really easy to go between on the flute, like F to G, we just lift one finger. But there are other fingerings, like C to D, where we have to move pretty much every finger on the flute, between a C, which is first finger and pinky, to a D, which is almost everything else. The only finger that doesn't change is this pinky, who stays up for both notes. So starting out a C major scale is actually kind of difficult. We move every finger on the flute. So that's a challenge. You go, okay, so the first two notes of a C major scale are kind of a challenge. Let's figure out how to practice those two notes to make it effective. So we've got our metronome on. And I'll just start by practicing those first two notes. But say it didn't go so well. Okay, I've got an extra note in between there. What's happening? So I'll stop and I'll look at what fingers I need to move. Oh, my first finger is moving before everything else, so I'm getting that C sharp in between. So I'm going to stop and think about moving my other fingers faster than that pointer finger, because it's a situation of I'm moving that pointer finger too fast. So I'll go through the scale, just two notes at a time, a little bit back and forth. Okay, I feel comfortable about that. All the way up and all the way back down on the first day that I'm practicing the scale. So I have an idea of what is it that I'm working on. And then I'll set my metronome and I'll figure out, can I play this scale at my goal tempo? And if I can, good. And if good, then I'll start thinking about the tone that we just practiced, or because we always want to play our technical studies, our scales, with good sound. And I'll also think about, okay, that went well. Now, is there anything that I can do to make this scale more interesting? Because we can't just play note, 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 note. Then nobody would want to listen to us. There has to be some life and some energy when we play music. So maybe I'm going to do a big crescendo to the top of the scale and a big decrescendo coming down the scale. So can anyone tell me what some of the things that we have to think about when we do a crescendo and a decrescendo, or something more interesting about the music? Can you tell me anything that we have to think about in particular when we do something like that?
Airflow.
Yes, the speed of the air. Why do we have to think about that?
Well, to get louder, you need more air.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
If you're not careful, more air makes it sharp.
Exactly. So while practicing our scales, while practicing this technique study, we're remembering to think about our tone. We're remembering to think about our pitch, and we're doing things to adjust that. So what are some ways that we can adjust to make the note not sharp when we're using more air?
Do you make adjustments with your embouchure?
Yes, we can make adjustments with our embouchure. That's one way. Instead of keeping our air direction the same as when we were playing softer, we can change our air direction by aiming our embouchure down. Usually we want to go down to make it flatter and up to make it sharper. So we've got quite a bit of flexibility if you learn how to use these, kind of your clown lip muscles. Everybody here can do kind of this bunny rabbit thing. I'm trying to be bunny rabbit. All of those muscles are the ones that we're using when we're playing the flute to bring the pitch down or to bring the pitch up. So what happens when we decrescendo? Anybody? We have to bring the pitch up because when we're using less air to get that softer, quieter sound, the pitch tends flat. So I use my bottom lip then to just gently push my airstream a little bit up. And I like to think about it as lifting the air out of the flute. So I'm taking the air and changing its direction ever so slightly so that eventually I have no air in the flute at all, and that's when the sound stops. So all of these things you can practice while you're doing your scales. But scales by themselves are kind of boring. So in addition to picking a major scale to work on with things like this, I mean, ultimately you're working for fast fingers and making sure that each finger is moving at exactly the right time and with all of the other fingers it needs to move with. But with these scales, I like to work on sequences. And sequences are scale-like patterns. They're little bits of scales that we chop up and try and make more musical or more musically satisfying. And there are books and books and books of these sequences. Some of my favorites are the Taffanel and Gobert daily exercises for the flute, the Reichert studies, and Trevor Y has some excellent books. Claire Southworth has some very nice sequence books. And there are hundreds. So when you get through a book of, they'll come in 12 patterns, 14 patterns, 17 patterns. When you get through a book, there's always another one that you can start on. Everybody has something to play. But the Reichert number 1 is nice because it's a scale, but it's broken up a little bit. So it's a C major scale again, like we were working on, but we're doing some skips. We're starting the scale on different notes, because when you get to your band repertoire, when you get to your solo pieces, it's they're not all, the scales aren't always going to start on the key note. They're not always going to start on C if you're in C major. They're not always going to start on G if you're playing in G, or B flat, or whatever the key is. They'll start on different notes. And so we're practicing these sequence patterns to practice playing these scales starting on different notes, going up, going down, playing arpeggios, various things like that. And you get a sequence book, or you find some sequence patterns online, and you work on one a day and say, okay, today I'm just going to work on Reichert number 1, the C major one, because I've been practicing my C major scale. And you do some of the same things that you were doing with your major scales. You look at, okay, what fingers aren't moving fast enough? Is that C to D still giving me trouble? Yeah, okay, I'll work on that a little bit more. There are some books that will work really, really hard on just going between 2 notes, or just going between 3 notes in a repeated pattern in succession, so you can get some very, very focused practice if you're practicing out of one of those books. But you say, okay, I'm doing that. And then what can I do to make this pattern interesting? So back to that Reichert number 1. So it's kind of this wave pattern. So what can I do to bring out that wave? I like to do a little bit of a swell on each wave. And then a nice long smooth scale all the way down to the bottom of the range. Other things you can look at are how well am I playing with the metronome? How precise are my 16th notes? Am I kind of doing or something where it's not even though it says it's even notes on the page? How can I smooth out those notes? And then again, that's going back to, okay, which fingers aren't moving fast enough? And a nice thing to do is to move your music stand into your bathroom and sit in front of your bathroom mirror. And as you're playing that scale, watch your fingers and go, oh, I didn't know that finger wasn't moving quite fast enough. Let's see if this time I can fix that.